I'd put him on the steps and he'd be like, "Argh!" just like enraged and trying to get himself together, you know, and I'd wait a few, I got a strict rule, which was as soon as you're done, you're welcome again. So it's completely under your control. You get yourself calmed down, you come and talk to me again. If you're calm enough so I like you, then you're welcome back in the family. No grudge, nothing. And so it's harder than you think. Like, people think they like their kids. It's like, don't be thinking that. They're hard to like. They're little monsters, and they're very, very pushy and provocative. And so lots of parents do not like their children, and they do terrible things to them their whole life. So it's no joke, and it's very common. And you know, that was Freud's observation, fundamental observation, that a lot of psychopathology is rooted in the family, and you can be sure of that. You know, when you hear about some mother who's done something terrible to her child, which happens reasonably frequently, you know perfectly well that she has a very terrible capacity to discipline. The child's just provoked her and provoked her and provoked her and provoked her and provoked her, and it just happens to be a day where her new boyfriend left and she's quite hungover and she got fired, and it's like, that's the wrong day to provoke her. And then she does something that is not good, and you read about it and you think, well, how could that happen? How could anyone do that? Well, that's how they do it. And so, and kids are very provocative, just like little chimps. Chimps will, the adolescents will like throw little pebbles and sticks at the sleeping larger males and bug them. And that teasing, which it is, that teasing turns into full-fledged dominance challenge behavior once the adolescent males get big enough to do it. And so when you're being provoked by a child, which they provoke you all the time, they're trying to figure out, well, just where are you exactly? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do this? You know, and how else are they going to figure it out? Anyways, he'd sit on the steps and he's just enraged and trying to control himself, and I'd watch that, and then, you know, I'd come back after about 2 minutes or whatever, and he'd still be, "Argh!" I'd say, well, you know, have you got yourself under control? Are you ready to get off the steps? He'd go, "No, not yet!" And then, you know, he'd get himself under control, and then he'd come back and, you know, he'd be contrite, and then I would like him right away, you know, because you got to watch that, you know, because you don't like being dominated by a 2-year-old. No one does. And so if the child hasn't mastered himself and started to act in accordance with the prevailing social norms, you won't like them. Well, you think, oh yeah, I will, because, you know, I'm a good person. It's like, no, you won't, and no, you're not a good person, so don't be thinking about that at all. It's just not true. So when he was contrite, then he'd come, and then, you know, we'd just go on like nothing had happened, because that's what you want to do, right? As soon as you get compliance, especially if the compliance is in the best interest of the child, you want to reward it instantly, right? That's the right thing to do, because so then, and you could just see him gaining control over himself. And so really what was happening is in his mind, in his brain, we'll say, there was a war between the psyche, the ego, that was starting to become integrated, you know, and starting to become a continuous person, an identity. And it's fragile in 2-year-olds, and it can be disrupted all the time, and it is. That's why they're so hyper emotional. It's fragile, that little ego, and it doesn't have a lot of power. And so what you want to do is reward it when it wins. You know, it's when he gets control over the underlying motivations, you want to say, hey, good work, man, good work, kid, you did it, you know, you got yourself under control, way to be. And the kid's really happy about that, because it's actually not that much fun to have a temper tantrum. It's exhausting, you know, it takes you over. Question?
Yeah, can you give an example of what you would reward him with?
Oh, just a pat on the head, or, you know, that's good, or kind word, you know, or whatever. Or, yeah, notice it, pay attention, that's it, pay attention. And that's it's a great thing to know with people, like in your relationships. Here's the key to a good relationship. It's not the only one, but watch your person carefully, carefully, carefully. And whenever they do something that you would like them to do more of, tell them that that was really good, and mean it. And it's not manipulative, because if it's manipulative, it won't work. It's like you have to say, wow, I'm so glad you did that, and you have to be precise. Here's what you just did that I thought was great. And oh boy, that's so nice that you noticed. I can't believe that you noticed. It's like, you know, you do that 20 times and the person will be like the rat that's just pushing the lever for cocaine, you know. So, but no, I'm serious. Skinner established this. B.F. Skinner noticed this a long time ago. Reward is intensely useful in terms of modifying behavior, but the problem is that it's really hard to notice when things are going right, because you're kind of primed to notice when things are going wrong, and so you use threat and punishment more often as agents of shaping the people that you're around, because you know, when everything's going right, it's like, what are you going to say? Everything's going right. It turns to zero. You just assume it, and that's not good. That's not good. You want to pay attention, and if your person, your children, your wife, your whoever, your mother, your sister, if you want to rectify your relationships with them, and I'm not saying to do this in a manipulative way, it won't work, but if they do something that's promoting harmony and peace and goodwill, it's like, attend to it, tell them that you noticed. It's like, it's so useful, and you have to get rid of your grudges and your resentment to do that, right? Because you don't, you're kind of mad at your sister, and then you notice she does something good, you think, there's no goddamn way I'm going to reward her for that, so you ignore her when she does something good. It's like, that's brilliant, that is, because then you've just punished her for doing what you want, and people do that with their kids all the time, you know, because they let the kids dominate them, then they get resentful, then the kid will run up to them to show them something that's kind of spectacular, and they're not happy. They'll like, oh yeah, that's, you know, I'm working. You know, little kid is all sad about that, and he's just learned something. So, and it's not perhaps what you want him to learn. And so you have to keep your relationship with your children pristine, and that means that you can't hold a grudge or resent them, and that means that you have to help them learn how to behave so that you like them. And that way, if you like them, and you're kind of sensible, and maybe your partner also likes them, so you know, you got a consensus going there, there's a reasonable possibility that other people will actually like them too, including other children, and then the world will open up to them. You know, then you'll bring them to people's houses, and the people will actually smile at them and give them a pat on the head, instead of thinking, oh my God, that brat's coming to visit again, I wonder what he'll break this time. You know, and that's just a horrible thing for your child to experience repetitively in situation after situation. All they learn is that adults have a false smile, but they're really lying all the time. God, it's like a bit of hell, and there's a lot of children who are trapped in that. It's really awful to see. I can see kids like that when I walk down the street, you know, it's like they're little doomed things, and there they are, and you know, they're screwed in 15 different ways, and there's no way out of it. It's really awful. So I would not recommend that you do that. It's better to notice that you're a bit of a monster, or a lot of a monster, and notice that you are much happier with the people around you when they behave in accordance with reasonable social norms, and then you actually feel genuinely connected to them, and you want to work on their behalf so that everything works out. But if you think you're a good person and that you'd never do anything that was harmful to your children, then you can just forget about that, because you'll never take it seriously enough to actually learn. So, alright, so anyways, we live inside this story as far as I can tell, and you know, we kind of put the story together inside us to begin with, and that happens between 2 and 4 when you're integrating those motivations and emotions into a relatively functional unity, right? And that does happen between 2 and 4. If you don't have your kids socialized by the time they're 4, you might as well just forget it. And I know that sounds terribly pessimistic and all of that, but I know the literature on trying to rectify antisocial behavior in children, and after the age of 4 it's virtually impossible no matter what you do. And the reason for that is that kids who are still acting like 2-year-olds when they're 4, that, you know, they're twice as old, as a 2-year-old. That's a lot of difference. Like a 4-year-old's an adult as far as a 2-year-old is concerned. And so if the 4-year-old is still acting like a 2-year-old, that's really not good. And other 4-year-olds will come up and, you know, do a little play invitation like a dog, and you know, the kid, the 2-year-old, 4-year-old has no idea how to react to that, and so the more mature kid thinks, oh well, how about I play with you? And then that kid is isolated from the peers, and after 4 you're mostly socialized by your peers, and so you just fall farther and farther and farther behind. You're more and more alienated, you're more bitter and angry, and no wonder, and it's just not, you can't rectify it. So that's useful to know. It's like your job from 2 to 4 is to turn your child, help turn your child into a functional unity. And by 3, they should be functional enough as a unity within themselves so that they can concentrate on a voluntary goal for some reasonable length of time, which is also why it's useful to let them spend some time alone so that they can learn to amuse themselves, because if they can't amuse themselves, they're not going to be able to play with other kids. And then by 3, they're sorted together enough so if another 3-year-old comes along, they can at least play in parallel, and may also may be able to start playing a cooperative game. And so that's often a fantasy game, you know, pretend. And so what the kids will do, sometimes they mediate it verbally, but sometimes it's more acted out. It's a combination of the two. They'll assign each other roles. They'll do this with you too. It's like, let's have a tea party. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means let's sit down and act out the act of sharing food and see if we can get that right. That's what the kid's saying. We'll have a little tea party. You know, it's very important because human beings share food. Like, this is a major thing to get right, man. And so the kid will say, well, you be the mom and I'll be the dad, and you know, we'll make a little fort and that'll be our house, and we'll go in there and we'll run our roles, and you know, we're acting out family. And if we're both reasonably civilized as 3-year-olds, we can concentrate on that goal. We can establish that little fictional world. We can negotiate a mutual goal, and then we can run the simulation. And that's what kids are doing when they're pretending. It's bloody brilliant. That's play, man. It's like, it's brilliant. It's absolutely unbelievable, because, you know, if you're going to play mom, let's say, it isn't like it isn't exactly like you imitate your mom, because imitation would be, you know how annoying it is when someone copies you. So, you know, you're sitting like that, and then I do the same thing. It's like, that's really annoying. And that isn't what kids do. They don't act out the precise actions that they've seen the target of their fantasy display. They're way more sophisticated than that. They watch their mother, let's say, like hawks, and then they start to extract out regularities in their behavior, which is mum behavior, let's say. That's what makes you mum, whatever that is. And then, so it's like they look at you across time and they extract out the regularity that makes you mother, and then they try to embody that regularity in their pretend play, and then they sort of encapsulate or incorporate the spirit of being a mother, or being a father, or whatever, or an animal, because they'll play at that. And so that's what they're doing. They're using their body as, and their mind as dramatic forums. It's really amazing, you know, it's so sophisticated. And no other animal does that as far as we know. And it's the platform on which language is based, you know. First of all, we imitate. And language is imitation, right? Because we use the same words, right? So it's imitation. It's a big deal. So you can act out someone else, and then you can conceptualize them in fantasy, and it's only way after that that you could maybe articulate it. Like, what does it mean to be a mother? So I could have you write an essay about that. Well, you'd have to think about it, right? You wouldn't just automatically know. But if someone hands you a baby, and you know, you're not completely socially blind, you roughly know what to do after you're done with your initial nervousness. You roughly know what to do. Don't drop it. That's a good rule. You've probably figured that one out at least. You know, don't yell at it, don't startle it, give it a little pat maybe, try hugging it. Maybe you go like this, you know, you make eyes at it. You know what to do. It's built into you, you know, it's built into you. But that doesn't mean you could lay it out as a series of rules about how to be a mother. It's like you could write a whole damn book about that. So, all right, so anyways, you live in this story, and first of all, you get your own story together, and that's by integrating your motivations and emotions together under social influence. You know, Piaget kind of states that before the age of 3, kids can't really play. They're egocentric, and it's not exactly right, because you're actually playing with your mother from the time you're born. So even with breastfeeding, that's a social interaction, and it's a complex cooperative endeavor, and it's often hard for mother and infant to get that right, because it's complicated, and it requires a lot of social interaction. Like, well, the child has to learn not to bite, for example, you know, and the mother has to learn not to be too nervous, and there's a lot of social bonding. It's really complicated social interaction. So the child, the infant, even at the earliest stages, is already engaged in a complex social dynamic that's essentially play oriented. But it's, you know, it's pretty primordial. It has to do mostly with the mouth, and child's mouth and tongue are already hardwired at birth. So